I never thought this day would come. I had imagined many things about my future, a stable job, a cozy little house, trips to faraway places, but marriage had never been on that list. I didn't hate the idea of marriage, but I never dreamed about it like other girls did. Growing up with only my father by my side, I had become accustomed to an independent life, taking care of myself without needing anyone else. And yet, here I was, preparing to step into a marriage I never expected. My name is Amelia, I'm 31 years old, and I work as a financial manager at an investment firm in New York. I have lived in this city for over a decade, burying myself in work, never once thinking that I would meet someone who would make me want to settle down. But then I met Daniel, a 34-year-old man with a warm smile and rare patience. Daniel wasn't the type of man I usually noticed. He didn't stand out in a crowd, he wasn't flashy or overly charming with sweet words. But there was something about him that made me feel safe. He was patient with me in a way no one else had ever been. Never rushing, never pressuring. We met through a mutual friend, Chloe, my close colleague. Chloe was always worried that I was too focused on work and neglecting my personal life, so one day, she arranged a casual meetup between me and Daniel. At first, I wasn't too excited. I was used to dining alone or immersing myself in reports rather than spending time dating. But Daniel was different from the men I had met before. He persistently invited me out, even though I turned him down a few times at the beginning. He never got upset when I told him I wasn't sure if I was ready for a serious relationship. "That's okay, Amelia. I'll wait until you're ready to open your heart," he once told me. And little by little, I let him into my life. After 6 months, I realized that Daniel's presence had become an essential part of my busy days. The good morning texts, the quick phone calls during lunch breaks, the simple evenings cooking together instead of going to fancy restaurants. All these little things made me realize that I had fallen for him without even noticing. A year after we met, Daniel got down on one knee and proposed to me during a quiet outdoor picnic. There were no fireworks, no grand romantic gestures like in the movies, just the two of us, under the evening sky, and a simple question. "Amelia, do you want to spend the rest of your life with me?" I thought I might be scared that I would hesitate, but instead I just laughed and said, "Yes." And so I, the person who once thought I would stay single forever, agreed to get married. But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a story I never saw coming. When Daniel suggested that I meet his parents over the weekend, I felt a bit uneasy. It wasn't that I was afraid of meeting my in-laws, I was confident and independent, but there was something in Daniel's tone that made me pause. He didn't sound as excited as I had expected. Instead, he seemed a bit hesitant. "My parents are a little traditional," Daniel said as we sat in our usual cafe. "They might be a bit strict at first, but don't worry, everything will be fine." His words made me think, what exactly did he mean by a little traditional? Would they be formal and principled, or would they be judgmental and difficult? Either way, I couldn't avoid this meeting. If I was going to marry Daniel, I needed to know what his parents were like. On Saturday morning, we drove out of New York to his parents' house in the suburbs of Connecticut. Their home was large, situated in an upscale neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns. But as I stepped inside, the atmosphere wasn't as warm as I had hoped. "Hi, Mom, hi, Dad," Daniel said cheerfully as we entered the living room. "So you finally made it," a woman's voice rang out. I turned and saw Eleanor, Daniel's mother, staring at me. Her sharp eyes scanned me from head to toe, barely hiding her scrutiny. I smiled politely and stepped forward, extending my hand. "I'm Amelia, it's a pleasure to meet you." But instead of shaking my hand, she simply gave a slight nod, her voice cold. So, you're Amelia." No compliment, no warm greeting, just a distant nod as if I were an uninvited guest. Richard, Daniel's father, seemed slightly more approachable. He shook my hand but still maintained a reserved demeanor. "So, what do you do? Daniel mentioned you work in finance?" "Yes, I'm a financial manager at an investment firm," I replied, keeping my tone natural. "Oh." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's a rather stressful job, isn't it? But women don't usually last long in that industry. It's better to focus on family once you're married." I hesitated for a second but kept my smile. I love my job, and I believe that if someone manages their time well, they can balance both career and family. "That's what all young women think before they get married," Eleanor scoffed, as if I had just said something foolish. Daniel gently squeezed my hand under the table, signaling me not to take it to heart, but that only made me more irritated. "Where's Daniel's brother?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Joshua is on his way," Richard said. "He's very eager to meet you." A moment later, Joshua, Daniel's older brother, walked in. He was well dressed, but from the very first handshake I could tell that something was off. "So, this is Amelia?" Joshua smirked. "Daniel, did you really choose a girl who grew up in a single-parent household?" The room suddenly fell silent. I looked straight at Joshua, trying to stay composed. "Is there something wrong with that?" I asked, my voice slow but firm. Joshua shrugged. "It's just that people who grow up without either a father or a mother aren't usually taught how to build a proper family. I'm sure you understand what I mean." I clenched my fists, but before I could respond, Eleanor cut in. "We don't mean to offend you, Amelia, but family is very important. Daniel is our youngest son, the pride of this family. If you want to marry him, you must understand that this family has its own rules." "Rules?" I repeated. "You must be fully devoted to Daniel and this family," she said firmly. "Women in the Richards family always put family first. Career, ambitions, friends. Everything else comes second. Can you do that?" I glanced at Daniel, hoping he would say something, but he remained silent. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I had mentally prepared myself to meet a traditional family, but I hadn't expected to face such rigid expectations and deep-seated prejudice. Daniel had told me his parents were a little strict, but I never imagined they would look down on me simply because I was raised by my father. They didn't care about who I was or what I had accomplished. For them, I was just someone expected to serve Daniel if I wanted to be part of this family. And the worst part was, Daniel didn't oppose them at all. Our wedding reception was held at a luxury hotel in New York, with over 150 guests, including friends, colleagues, and both families. I had always thought this would be a happy day the moment I stepped into a new chapter of my life. But I was wrong. Things started to go wrong from the very beginning of the event. Daniel's parents, Richard and Eleanor, showed up already tipsy, even though the reception had just begun. They were drinking hard liquor instead of wine like the other guests, while Joshua, Daniel's brother, sat with a few relatives, watching me with a judgmental glare. I tried to ignore them and focused on the warm congratulations from my friends. But then they started causing a scene. In the middle of the reception, as Daniel and I were greeting guests, Eleanor suddenly grabbed the microphone, her voice slurred from the alcohol. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" she called out, laughing loudly as she stumbled toward the stage. "I have a few words to say to our lovely bride." The entire hall fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. I looked at Daniel, hoping he would stop his mother, but he just gave an awkward smile, making no effort to intervene. Eleanor stared at me, then smirked. "Amelia, you are now officially part of the Richards family, but before you walk through this door you have to prove that you are worthy." I blinked, confused. "I don't understand, ma'am." "We can't just let our son marry someone who doesn't understand family responsibility," Richard interjected. "So, starting next month, you'll need to send us at least $1,500 every month as a token of gratitude. And of course, your annual bonuses will belong to this family as well." A murmur spread through the room. I stood frozen. Did they just say that? I turned to Daniel, hoping he would stand up for me, but he just shrugged. "I think it makes sense, Amelia," he said, his voice casual. "They raised me. It's our duty to give back to them." A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sorry, but that is not my obligation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mr. and Mrs. Richards, I respect this family, but my money is mine, and I am not here to financially support anyone else." "How dare you!" Eleanor practically screamed, her face red with alcohol and fury. "Who do you think you are to refuse your in-laws? You're just a motherless girl, someone who was never properly raised. How would you even know how to serve your husband and this family?" The room went ice cold. I could hear my own sharp breathing as the weight of her words sank in. On the other side of the hall, my father, Thomas, had reached his breaking point. He stepped onto the stage, snatching the microphone from Eleanor's hand. "Enough!" His voice rang out, filled with anger, yet still composed. "Do you even realize what you're doing? This is my daughter's wedding, not a place for you to insult her." Eleanor scoffed. "We're just stating the truth, Mr. Thomas. You raised her alone, and as a result she turned into a girl who doesn't respect her in-laws. I told you, children raised without a father or mother never know how to build a real family." Her words felt like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. My father took a deep breath, disappointment filling his eyes. "I thought Daniel's family was well educated, but I was clearly mistaken. If this is how you treat my daughter, then I consider it a blessing that she will not become part of your family." I turned to Daniel, hoping he would stand up for me, but he said nothing, staring at the floor in silence. And in that moment, I knew I could not go through with this marriage. I took the microphone from my father's hand and looked directly at Daniel's family. "Thank you for this lovely event. But I have made my decision. This marriage ends right here." The entire hall fell into a stunned silence. Daniel's parents gasped, Joshua looked dumbfounded, and Daniel turned pale as a ghost. I placed the engagement ring on the table, turned around and walked out of the reception, leaving behind a family I never wanted to belong to. The room remained silent in the wake of my announcement. Shocked gazes and hushed whispers filled the space. I could see the stunned faces of Daniel's parents, Richard and Eleanor, completely frozen, while Daniel looked like he had just taken a brutal hit to his pride. My father Thomas stepped forward, his sharp eyes fixed on the Richards family, his presence still calm but commanding. He turned to Richard, locking eyes with him as if carefully considering his next words. "Richard," my father said slowly, his voice steady yet powerful, "I think you should reconsider the words you just said." Richard scoffed, trying to hold on to the last remnants of his pride. "I don't think we have anything left to discuss, Thomas. Your daughter just humiliated my family by calling off the wedding in front of everyone." My father crossed his arms and gave a knowing smile. "Oh, is that so? Funny, because from where I'm standing, the only one humiliating himself here is you, Richard." The room grew tense. My father continued, his voice calm but razor sharp. "I'm guessing you have no idea who I happen to know in your company, do you?" Richard's expression shifted slightly. "What are you talking about?" My father casually adjusted his tie, then delivered a single sentence that left the entire room in stunned silence. "I'm a close friend of Henry Wallace, the CEO of the company where you serve as Vice President of Finance." Silence fell over the hall. I could see the color drain from Richard's face. If he had been clinging to any sense of arrogance before, it was now completely replaced by sheer panic. Whispers rippled through the crowd again, but this time the murmurs were no longer sympathy for me but mockery directed at Richard and his family. "Impossible!" Richard stammered, looking at my father with pure horror in his eyes. My father let out a light chuckle. "Oh, but it's true. Henry and I have been friends since college. He was also raised by a single mother, just like me and Amelia." "Do you remember what you just said, Richard? You insulted every person who grew up in a single-parent household, including the very man who holds your career in his hands." Sweat began to bead on Richard's forehead. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by genuine fear. Laughter erupted from the guests. Some murmured among themselves while others openly enjoyed watching my father completely outmaneuver Richard. "If Henry hears about this..." "Do you really think you'll keep your position, Richard?" my father asked pointedly, his tone no longer playful. Eleanor stood frozen, her face pale. Joshua, who had just looked down on me for being raised by a single father, now looked like he wanted to disappear into thin air. And then, right before my eyes, Richard dropped to his knees in front of my father. The entire room gasped, unable to believe what they were witnessing. A man who had once been so arrogant and powerful was now on his knees, begging before the very person he had once looked down on. "Thomas, please," Richard's voice trembled. I misspoke. Please don't tell Henry. I don't want to lose my position." "How interesting," my father said slowly. "Earlier, you called me worthless because I was a single father, and yet here you are, kneeling before me, begging me to save your career?" The entire hall erupted with laughter. I had never seen a humiliation this severe in my life. I turned to Daniel. He couldn't even look at me anymore. He just stood there, his head hung low, unable to say a word. And in that moment I knew I had truly escaped a nightmare. I looked straight at Daniel, my words crystal clear for everyone to hear. "This marriage ends right here." A shockwave rippled through the hall. Guests whispered among themselves, some gawking in disbelief as they witnessed a bride canceling her own wedding in front of everyone. I saw a few of Daniel's colleagues with their mouths open, and some guests even pulled out their phones to record the moment. Daniel stood frozen, his face completely drained of color. "Amelia, what are you saying?" His voice cracked. I had no patience left. I looked straight at him, the man I once thought would protect me but who turned out to be nothing more than a coward. "Daniel, you stood there, silent, while your parents humiliated me, demanded that I financially support them, and acted like it was completely normal. You didn't just let them insult me, you let them disrespect the man who raised me on his own for years. You know what? You are not worth another second of my time." A wave of gasps filled the room. I saw Daniel's parents, Richard and Eleanor, pale as ghosts, and Joshua, completely stiff, like a statue. Without a moment of hesitation, I slipped the wedding ring off my finger and placed it on the table in front of Daniel. "We never registered the marriage, so I owe you nothing." My father stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. He took the microphone and spoke firmly and clearly. "And to avoid any misunderstandings, my daughter and I will be returning all the wedding gifts. We don't need anything from this family." I turned to the event manager and asked them to start the process of returning the envelopes to each guest. The guests looked at each other, unsure of how to react. Some stood up and applauded, perhaps those who had also found Daniel's family outrageous but had remained silent. Others scoffed, whispering among themselves, undoubtedly mocking the humiliation of the Richards family. I walked out of the reception with my father, leaving chaos behind. But I didn't care what happened next. I knew that this was just the beginning of the real downfall. But this time, the ones suffering the consequences wouldn't be me. Within a week, news of the cancelled wedding spread like wildfire through Daniel's company. His colleagues, many of whom had attended the wedding, didn't waste any time spreading the story. No one respected a man who let his parents control him so completely that he was willing to betray his fiancée. The result? Daniel couldn't handle the shame and resigned. A man who once took so much pride in his career was now leaving in disgrace. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Richard, Daniel's father, faced even greater consequences. After my father revealed his friendship with CEO Henry Wallace, the news quickly reached the company's executives. A private meeting was held soon after. The outcome? Richard was demoted and transferred to a small branch in a remote town in Texas. For someone who had once held the title of Vice President of Finance, being reassigned to such a low-level position was nothing short of a slap to his dignity. The Richards family lost all respect among their relatives. I heard that their extended family, the same people who once admired them, began to distance themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a family that was both greedy and publicly disgraced in front of hundreds of guests. As for Eleanor, the woman who once took so much pride in having a prestigious family, she could no longer even lift her head in public. Sitting in our usual cafe with my father, I looked at him and smiled. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. I took a sip of my coffee, exhaling in relief. "No, Dad. Calling off that wedding was probably the smartest decision I've ever made." He chuckled, patting my hand gently. "I'm proud of you, Amelia. You're stronger than you think." I smiled, feeling lighter than ever. I had freed myself from a terrible future, and more importantly, I had reclaimed my own worth. And my story was far from over. After ending my engagement with Daniel, I began spending more time with my father, Thomas. Without the weight of a toxic marriage hanging over me, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and clarity. We had deeper conversations, making up for lost time. Time I had once wasted chasing work and a relationship that was never meant to be. "Do you know how proud I am of you, Amelia?" he asked one afternoon as we sat in his office drinking tea. "You chose yourself instead of bowing to a family that didn't deserve you. That's something your mother would have been proud of too." I smiled. My mother had passed away when I was young, and since then my father had been both my mom and dad. He had sacrificed so much to give me the life I had today. He set his teacup down, his gaze turning more serious. "Amelia, I've been thinking a lot about something. Have you ever considered taking over my company?" I blinked in surprise. "You mean, taking your place?" Thomas & Associates was a financial consulting firm my father had built over 20 years. While I had a successful career in finance, I had never imagined leading an entire company. I'm not pressuring you, he assured me, but I believe you can do it. You have the skills, the experience, and, most importantly, the independent mindset of a true leader. I sat in silence. I had always believed my career path was within my current investment firm. But now a new door was opening in front of me. For the next few weeks, I thought long and hard about my father's offer. My focus shifted completely. Dating, romance, it no longer seemed important. I had once thought that marrying Daniel would be the biggest milestone in my life, but I was wrong. The real turning point was choosing a new path for my future. I was no longer a woman preparing for marriage. I was a woman stepping into leadership. After many sleepless nights, I made my decision. I resigned from my job and joined my father's company. "I'll give it my all, Dad," I told him on a Monday morning as I officially stepped into my new office at Thomas & Associates. He smiled. "I never doubted that for a second, Amelia." Looking back at everything I had been through, I knew calling off the wedding was the best decision I had ever made. If I hadn't stood my ground that day, I would have been trapped in a life of control, misery, and injustice. But now I had a future I was in control of, a future that belonged to me and no one else. I chose myself, and I had never felt stronger. Looking back, I realized that losing something you thought was important can sometimes be the very thing that helps you find yourself. If I hadn't had the courage to walk away, I would have ended up stuck in a life I never deserved. Family should never be about control, and love should never come at the cost of self-sacrifice. Today, I haven't just gained my freedom. I've found a new direction for my career and my life. True happiness comes from choosing yourself first. What do you think about my story? Do you agree that sometimes walking away from the wrong thing is the best decision you can make? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about life, family, and the lessons that shape us.